Come be a part of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics with your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. Hear the voices of liberty speaking all across America. Doc Holliday provides thought-provoking interviews and commentary about the issues and actions that are afflicting this country and what we need to do to get America back on track. Get fired up, get inspired, get on board with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right now.
And here we go.
And once again, that is the sound of rock cracking right here. We're starting the last week of January. 2022 has begun. And what does the future look like for the rest of this year? Well, we got the latest research coming out of Israel talking about the vaccines. Are they working? The boosters working? What do we know? Well, the latest research in Israel, which has one of the world's highest vaccination rates, up in the 94% of all the residents, all the citizens, everybody living in the country of Israel have been vaccinated. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to get into those statistics and see if we follow the science. There's some great research that should really affect what the other countries in the world want to do. So we're going to talk about that today. Very important show. And before we kick that off, I just have to say, after a year of President Biden in office, and here we have, I think, what we see going on with this voting rights bill, what they're calling a voting rights bill, but it is, where did it get inspired from? Well, it was slipped. One of the U.S. representatives in our nation, Hakeem Jeffries, he let it slip where it all came from. And if you don't believe me, listen to him say it himself. But this is where the voting rights bill came from, and this is what Joe Biden said. If you're not for this bill, you're with Bull Connor, and you're with George Wallace. And yet this bill, where did it come from? Well, listen to the United States Congressman Hakeem Jeffries just last week. Listen to him, what he had to say. Where did this bill come from?
We're inspired, Hugo Chavez, Cesar Chavez. We're inspired by all of these leaders. We're inspired, Hugo Chavez, Cesar Chavez. We're inspired by all of these leaders.
Well, there you have it. Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez inspired the voting rights. Wow. The voting rights bill that they want to call civil rights bill, and inspired by Hugo Chavez. And he said, Cesar Chavez. Well, which Chavez is it? Chavez. Well, he was the dictator, the socialist communist dictator in Venezuela. When did Venezuela start going south and its people being desperate, and they're starving now in some places, and it's just created chaos? And they keep winning elections because why? The elections are rigged. They are rigged. And we know that. And it's been proven down in Venezuela. And now Hakeem Jeffries, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, has said this voting right bill that President Biden's pushing, and the Democratic majority in the House and Senate, and if Sinema in Arizona, the Democrat there, and the Democrat in West Virginia, Joe Manchin, they so far have stood up and said, no, we're not going to get rid of the filibuster. It'll take 60 votes to get this passed in the Senate, and that's how you get consensus. And of all the things, now we know where it came from. Chavez, Hugo Chavez. And Congressman Jeffries says that. Leaders we look up to, leaders that inspire us. Hakeem Jeffries, thank you for being honest. Thank you for being honest. Wow. This is the danger that so many people have been just wrapped up in a frenzy to get something passed that is more socialist and communist that this President Joe Biden, is pushing, and it's frightening. When you talk about forcing every state to have a mail-in ballot, when they don't even have systems to do it, the entire state being forced to, and for the federal government to control elections that since the beginning of this country has been put in the U.S. Constitution to be done by the states. Why do we have this rush towards socialism? It's just, you can't mistake, even though they try to cover it up, just like Hakeem Jeffries just let it slip out of the bag. This is the socialist communist regime living within the Democratic Party. Joe Biden in his news conference last week said, well, I'm not a socialist like Bernie Sanders. Said, I like Bernie Sanders, but I'm not a socialist. Really? You say you're not a socialist, Joe Biden. Then why do you promote socialist policies? And you have been. It's the Democratic Party who think that they can get by with saying they aren't socialist. Well, guess what? When you let the socialists force you into doing things that you've never done before as a senator, even though you were a liberal Democrat senator for so many years, Joe Biden, what I mean? Well, he was always for the Hyde Amendment. And if you're not aware of the Hyde Amendment, it's where Congressman Hyde, but way back in the 1970s, when Jimmy Carter was president, Jimmy Carter supported this. He said, we won't force taxpayers to spend taxpayer dollars on abortions. Federal money cannot be used to provide abortions. And Joe Biden was always for that until 2020. He got his arm twisted by the left. And that, I'm just saying, that's one of the things, one of many. You never saw Joe Biden talking about you have to have mail-in elections. Every state must be forced to do mail-in elections. But he obviously liked what happened in 2020, didn't he? So I just have to bring that up before we get into the talk about the vaccinations and the research. So go back and listen to why the Democrats are inspired by Hugo Chavez, just like Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Let your friends and neighbors know. The socialists are in control of the Democratic Party now. Stop calling them Democrats. Like I said, until the Democrats kick the socialists out of their party, stop voting for the socialists. Stop voting for the Democrats. Until they kick the socialists out of their party, they are the socialists. And until they lose a few elections and wake up, then, so be it. So be it. If you're not for socialism in America, stop voting for Democrats until they kick the socialists out of the party. I mean, that's as simple as that. That's as simple as it can be said. Now, let's look at, there's this latest research out of Israel. Tells us, we always hear the phrase, we're going to follow the science. And that is true. We need to follow the science. Want to follow the science. But there's one of the things that we see in Israel, they have, what I said on the beginning of the show, they have vaccinated, it's a small country, 10 million people, I may be off a little bit, 10 million or so, but they had I'm looking at statistics now, the rate of fully vaccinated Israelis is 96.2%. It is the highest in the world. They were very aggressive when boosters came out. And they're already working on plans for the fourth shot, or what we would call the second booster. When we say these boosters, it's the same amount. It's not like a little added. I mean, it's the same amount as 1 and 2, the third shot, fourth shot. It's all the same amount. From everything I've read and seen. I don't want to tell you something that I don't know for sure. But when they call boosters, it's not like adding a little bit more. It's another full dose. But this is the thing. All the boosters in Israel, and they had a huge outbreaks last summer with the Delta, and now they're being swamped with the Omicron variant of COVID. And all of the best research shows that the vaccines do not prevent infection. And they don't stop the spread of the disease. Now, one thing they seem to do, they did in Delta, very much so, is they reduce the severe cases and fatalities, keep so many people from having to go to the hospital. Now, we're not sure on the Omicron variant. We're going to have to get more research into that. But there's some very serious scientists and clinicians in Israel are telling the government now to admit that the vaccines don't work as expected, and to work on other ways to control the virus. And they're saying, hey, let's look more at effective treatments instead of ineffective vaccines. We've done so much for vaccines, but people are getting COVID. People who have had the vaccines and been boosted are getting COVID. And so what does that mean? Well, the irony is that the unvaccinated may have better natural immunity than the vaccinated against Omicron, the Omicron variant, since the virus has mutated in order to specifically to defeat the spike proteins produced by the vaccines. Now, we're not going to get deep in the weeds. You can go get the research. You can look at this research, look for the latest research out of Israel. But it's saying more and more evidence is emerging about the side effects of the vaccines, including heart failure among otherwise healthy men under 40. Now, we've alluded some to that. I'm waiting for more research to come out, but we're seeing more and more of that. And the possible reproductive damage to women of childbearing age. What I'm saying, and I don't want anybody to say this is misinformation and call up YouTube and call up Apple podcast, the iTunes, and all the different radio stations that we're on, iHeartRadio. I'm glad to be on all these different platforms, so I'm not giving out misinformation. I just want you to know there are people who are saying that healthy men under 40 are having some heart failure, and reproductive damage to women of childbearing age is coming from somewhere. Is it the vaccine? We need to have that researched. CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, we need them to tell us the truth. We are grown men and women. And if there is some risk for the vaccine, let us know. Let us know it's 1 out of a million, if that's what it is, or 2 out of a million, or if it's 1 out of 100,000. What is it? Well, inquiring minds want to know, but it's our health that is at risk. And should this be given to children over 5 years old? Should it be? We've had this government push to get more and more children vaccinated. In some places, schools are requiring it, mandating vaccinations for children over the age of 5. Is this healthy for America? And these are questions that need to be brought out and debated, not in some hot air place, in a place where some people don't try to shut you down for asking questions. It's our health. It's our children's health. It's the health of a nation. And let me just read you some out of this article that came, right out of Israel just recently. There's Professor Ehud Qimron. It's Qimron. Ministry of Health. It's time to admit failure. That's the title of his article. And he's the head of the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at Tel Aviv University. And just a top scientist there. And he's saying, Ministry of Health, it's time to admit failure. In the end, the truth will always be revealed, and the truth about the coronavirus policy is beginning to be revealed. When the destructive concepts collapse one by one, there's nothing left but to tell the experts who led the management of the pandemic, we told you so. And he goes on and says, 2 years late, you finally realize that a respiratory virus cannot be defeated and that any such attempt is doomed to fail. You do not admit it because you have admitted almost no mistake in the last 2 years. But in retrospect, it is clear that you have failed miserably in almost all your actions. And even the media is already having a hard time covering your shame. Now, he's talking to the head of the Israeli government. He's talking about, this is about in Israel. But you can almost see it being said right to the American, talking about Dr. Fauci, and Joe Biden saying he's going to beat the virus. Well, guess what? It's hard to beat a respiratory virus. And this scientist went on and said, however, from the heights of your hubris, you have also ignored the fact that in the end, the truth will be revealed, and it begins to be revealed. The truth is that you have brought the public's trust in you to an unprecedented low, and you have eroded your status as a source of authority. And that's what we're talking about, the CDC. They keep coming out and changing their story. We're talking about Dr. Fauci. Face mask, no face mask. Beginning, no, you don't need a face mask. And everybody got to have a face mask. And the cloth mask doesn't keep the Omicron variant out. Well, none of the variants get kept out of a cloth face mask, and we've known that. And then you get an N95. Well, who's going to seal that on their face and breathe through it? I mean, I do. When I'm in a dental clinic, I have to wear it and another mask over it, because that's what a state board tells me I got to do. And I think that's secure. But I mean, you're gonna have if you put on N95 and wear it all day, you're going to have your ears about 3 feet long by the end of the year. But listen, I just have to tell you, this article, I think it's more than just for Israel. It's for the whole world. And we need to people need to be able not to just fight and argue, but we need scientists who will actually say, let's look into this. And hospitals, are they having more young men under the age 40? Are you seeing heart problems? Are people having heart attacks? Are people dying? And we've told you about it. I mean, there's some articles where there's been autopsy, and the people, we know at least one case where they said it was the vaccine that made his heart go into heart failure. I mean, that's written on the death certificate. A 26-year-old healthy young man. So these, I mean, you don't have to. It's not conspiracy theory. It's just saying we need our national health to be looked at and know that we're doing our very best. Nobody's going to be perfect. We understand that. Joe Biden didn't give Donald Trump a chance on that, saying, hey, we got to find out what to do. He blamed him for everything and all the deaths, and now there's more people dead than a lot more people have died since he's been president. And we've talked about that. When Joe Biden promised he was going to beat the virus, well, the virus is beating him with the Delta variant, now the Omicron variant, and it's time for him to admit what they've been pursuing is not working. And one of the things that we got to get into, and I'm going to tell you, it's hurting the economy. This whole government response, as much as they thought, it'd be great for everybody to get a vaccine, but now it's hurting the economy, even with this 5G in the airline industry. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But first, let me remind you, you listen to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. You're listening to us right here on webtalkradio.net. And we're glad to have each and every one of you. I'm the host, Dr. Ed Holliday. We're glad to have you here. We talk about things that you may not hear anywhere else. And that's why we're glad to come on the air right here on webtalkradio.net and tell you some things that you may not be hearing in the different media. So listen to us. And this is an election year, midterm election year, and we're called Rock Splitting Politics. And we're going to have a lot of rock splitting to do with the politics. And this is the first month of year 2022. So keep listening, and we will have some great guests coming up during the year and tell you about some of the different races that are shaping up for the Congress, for the House of Representatives and the Senate. And we do have a book called Bedrock Truth. if you like to read that book, if you like to own that book, you can order it from DocHolliday.org. That's Doc Holliday. If Holiday's got two L's in it, .org. DocHolliday.org. You can go there and order Bedrock Truth. And we got a book about Israel. We're talking about Israel, and we got a book about Israel that I had a chapter in. So you order that book also if you want to. And just the way we try to grow is you tell your friends and neighbors, tell your people you know that would like to listen to this show. You can listen to it anytime you want to. And I think now we're updating on Tuesdays when the new show comes up. So every week we'll have a new show coming up on Tuesday of that week. But again, glad to have you. This is going to be a rock and roll year. This is a midterm election year and a lot of things going on. So keep listening. Now, take a listen to this, and then we're going to talk about how this policy, a vaccination policy, is affecting our entire economy right here in America. Well, that was some music called Deception. A little bit you can find, but I think there's a lot of deception from this administration. And one of the things that they talk about is this 5G and the airlines. And this has been in the make for 2 or 3 years, knowing this time was coming. And now we're talking about, well, the airlines are worried about they're not ready for 5G. Why aren't they ready for 5G? Well, there's one of the smartest people I know when it comes to economies and the world economy, America's economy, other countries' economy, is Jim Rickards. And you can check some of his things. They're on YouTube, and he's on a lot of different programs because he's brilliant. He's worked with Pentagon and CIA doing economic models in his past, and he runs newsletters, and he's just brilliant when it comes to the economy. But Jim Rickards was talking about, why wasn't this problem identified and fixed earlier? Jim asked. There's nothing new about digital avionics or 5G. Everybody knew this time was coming, so why are we not ready now? And he says the real difficulty was that the alligators that could not be fixed in time because there's a shortage of qualified engineers in Wichita, Kansas area to do the work. Well, what does that mean? I had no idea what's going on in Wichita, Kansas. Well, Jim tells us, he says, they don't call Wichita, quote, the air capital of the world, unquote, for nothing. And he says there, and that's where they do almost all the avionics engineering firms are federal contractors because they work on military as well as civilian contracts. And guess what? They're regulated by the FAA. And what else? Vaccine mandates forced on the federal government. But anybody has a federal contract. Well, if you work on any military aircraft, you got a federal contract. And he said these engineers, many of them are men in their 40s and 50s. And this is the only place this is done is in Wichita, Kansas. I won't say the only place, but here it is the Mecca. It's the control center of air industry for these type things and these engineers. And they have, guess what? They've had a relatively low rate of vaccination compared to the national average, where it's like maybe 50%, where the national average is nearing, 80%. And guess what? They're being fired or furloughed because of the vax mandates. So you can't get the alligators that these needs to be done for these planes because they don't have the engineering firepower. And basically saying that's another supply chain breakdown. And you have to have these alligators to be recalibrated for 5G. And so you you're getting something here, and I hope you go listen to Jim Rickards. He's got some great videos out there talking about the economy now, and you hear updates of what he thinks. And you can go to YouTube and all kind of different programs. But if you can hear Jim Rickards, you need to listen to him because he really pinpoints. He's a brilliant mind. But he's telling us why the press is not telling you why we're having problems with 5G and airline industry. I mean, this is something they knew was coming for years. It's not like it was just thrown on them. But they're acting like, oh, we weren't ready, we can't do this. They won't tell you the reason why. It's because, like I said, Wichita, Kansas, there's not enough engineers that can recalibrate the altimeters that the planes have to use. And why? Because of the vaccine mandates. This is just one of the many supply chain bottlenecks. If Donald Trump was president, I don't think we'd ever had a mandate. And we wouldn't have near as many bottlenecks and supply chain problems. But it's affecting the entire economy. I mean, it's just, how long can we go without this economy just sort of crashing because of these supply chain bottlenecks, blockades? And it's coming because people, good, experienced people who know what's going on, if they're truckers, if they're airline engineers, if they're our military, the brightest in our military, some of them being dismissed because of the vaccine mandate. Wow. We don't have to have supply chain issues, but President Biden is making sure we have them because he will not turn course. What did we just tell you about the Israeli research, the latest research from the country of Israel? 96% vaccinated rate and boosted, and talking about the fourth booster. And guess what? They are having a breakout of the Omicron variant of COVID all over the place. The vaccines are not preventing it. Yes, it may make it not as severe, but why do you push vaccine mandates? The new science is here. Follow the science. Democrats, Republicans, independents, let's follow the science. Let's do what's healthy for America. Let's talk about the risk. If there are risks coming from the vaccinations, we need to know it. Talk about it. We have records now. Tell us the whole story. Tell us the truth and nothing but the truth. We're big people. We're adults. We can take it. We need to know the truth. Now, the children we need to protect. If there's vaccine problems, we need to know and not be giving it to children if it's going to cause heart problems or something in the future. We need to ask the questions and get the research and talk about it and let people know if there's risk. That's the healthy thing to do. It's the scientific thing to do. Follow the science. Mr. President, it's time for a pivot. For the sake of our economy, for the sake of the future of the men and women of America, and especially the children of America, let's relook at this whole thing and let's pivot and let's move America forward together. That sounds like a good Democratic liberal term, forward together. Isn't that what Hillary ran on or something? But we need to have it based on science and people we can trust. So I'd get rid of Fauci, Dr. Fauci. Who can trust him now? He said everything out of both sides of his mouth. All right. Tell your congressman, congresswoman, your U.S. senators, that we need to pivot. We need to get America healthy. We're not doing it through the vaccine mandates. We're hurting our economy. We're hurting ourselves. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. And it's going to start hurting. We're not going to be able to dance to the finish line with shooting ourselves in the foot. You listen to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. This is a pivotal election year. Listen to us every week. We bring you stories just like we did today that you're not hearing in the mainstream media, so that you'll be better informed, so that when you go to vote, you'll know why you're voting And let's make sure the socialists do not take over this country. We can do it if you get out and convince people not to vote for socialists or people who love the socialists and work with them in their agenda. Okay. See you next week. It's Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. We'll see you then.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember to listen again next week for another edition of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. You can order Ed's new book, Bedrock Truths, by clicking on the book cover right in front of you on the screen, or visit docholliday.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.